Doctors, what's the most outrageous self-diagnosis you've heard from a patient? At the psych hospital, we had a difficult patient, violent, making wild accusations, completely psychotic. During treatment team meeting at the psych hospital, when we were working out her treatment plan, she suddenly started screaming that she'd gone blind, that she couldn't see, and if we cared anything about her, we'd help her. This time, she had a point, though. The lens of her eyeglasses had fallen out and landed in the breast pocket of her shirt.
It's wild how sometimes the most intense situations can reveal a simple fix. I remember a time with a friend who thought they lost their phone. They were flipping out, searching everywhere, only to find it in their hand the whole time. Just a reminder that things can seem way worse than they are, and sometimes the solution is right in front of you.
Had a patient come in once due to weight gain that she thought was due to being pregnant. Made sense, except she'd taken more than half a dozen pregnancy tests, and they were all negative. She was convinced she was pregnant, though, and wanted me to check. I tell her, okay, I'll do a blood test, since we could detect pregnancy earlier with that. But she refuses. Says that she just wants to pee on the stick in front of me and have me read it. So I say sure, and lo and behold, it's negative. Little more questioning, and it turns out she'd been eating literally nothing but chicken wings for weeks. When I asked her why in the world she would do that, she replied that she just really liked chicken wings.
That's a wild story. Kind of funny how someone can be so fixated on one idea. The chicken wings bit is surprising, though. I mean, you'd think a balanced diet would be a priority, but I guess cravings have their way. The whole situation just shows how people can get caught up in their own thoughts. Sometimes you just have to step back and get a reality check. Chicken wings can't be the whole meal.
Vet student here. I've had some dude with a super aggressive dog diagnosed the poor thing with neural instability causing his aggression from an online consultation with a homeopathic shaman. He then came into the clinic with instructions from the shaman that he wanted the vet to carry out, including rubbing the dog all over with a $200 healing stone, despite the fact that the vet had obviously the more reasonable explanation. He didn't want to believe leaving a dog in the backyard without much human/animal interaction for most of its life could cause aggression. Go figure.
Sounds like that dude was really set on his own ideas. It's wild how some people can ignore basic pet care facts. The vet probably had the right approach, but it's tough when folks cling to something else. Rubbing a dog with a healing stone seems a bit out there. Can't help but wonder how that dog felt about it all. People can be pretty stubborn, even when it comes to their pets.
Pharmacist here. I've had more than one patient run to me screaming that they looked up their rash on WebMD and must have Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Actual diagnosis: contact dermatitis from laundry soap. Edit: if you begin taking any medication, especially lamotrigine, Bactrim, or carbamazepine, and develop a rash, then yes, you should call your doctor immediately.
I used to freak out about every little health issue. Once I thought I had a serious infection from a minor cut. My friend told me to chill out, it was just a scrape. I went to the doctor, and they confirmed it wasn't serious. Now I just try to take things a bit easier. WebMD can really send you down a rabbit hole of worry for nothing.
ER and family practice mid-level here. Had someone come in one day saying they had wires and fibers under their skin, including a little Ziploc bag of, you guessed it, wires and fibers that they had pulled out, he said, with a needle. Now, this is Morgellons, a well-known psychological entity, but to see it so blatantly like you read about in the textbooks just blew me away. He actually believed it. Very unsettling.
That's a wild story. It's interesting how some people can really be convinced of things that don't align with reality. I mean, to bring in a bag of wires and fibers is something else. It must have been tough to navigate that situation. Sometimes you just encounter folks with beliefs that are hard to understand, and it makes you think about how the mind works. Definitely an experience you won't forget.
Paramedic here, technically not a doctor, but here goes. Walked in the door to a young male with chest pain. As I walked up to him and introduced myself, he said, "I have pericarditis." I felt like telling him, "I'm not sure how you would know if you did, but we'll run some tests and see what we have." Put an ECG on, took him to the hospital for more tests. We found out the final diagnosis by the hospital staff was, surprise, surprise, pericarditis. So there you have it. The patient was right. I still have absolutely no idea how this kid knew that. Edit. BTW, there was no prior history of pericarditis, nor any issues with chest pain at all.
It's interesting how some people just know what's going on with their bodies. I had a friend who always seemed to have a knack for diagnosing himself. He once mentioned feeling a pain in his side and suspected appendicitis. We laughed it off until he actually ended up in the ER, and guess what? It turned out he was right. Sometimes, intuition goes a long way, even when you least expect it.
Guy comes into my old ER one day with a nail in his hand from an accidental discharge of a nail gun. Nurse is checking him in and asked him to rate his pain on a scale of 1 to 10. He replies that it's only about a 3. We all look at him like he's nuts because our pain is at a 5 and we're just looking at him bleeding. Plus, this is a charity hospital where 99% of the patients are sitting in bed, casually texting or chatting on the phone, but still rate their pains as 10-10. You get the picture. So the triage nurse rolls her eyes and asks him how it could only be a 3. He responds by saying that one morning he was cooking his girlfriend breakfast. They were especially hungry that day because they had just been a bit frisky when they woke up. Since they had just finished, he wasn't wearing any pants. Well, he says that when he bumped the pan and the hot bacon grease spilled on his testicles, that was certainly a 10-tenths. So to him, a nail in the hand only rated a 3 out of 10.
That guy had a wild perspective on pain. It's interesting how experiences can shape your threshold. I mean, getting burned like that sounds rough, but it puts things into context. In a place like that ER, everyone has their own stories, but not everyone rates pain the same. It's just surprising to see someone downplay something you'd expect to hurt way more. Makes you wonder what else has happened in their life.
Kind of opposite to what everyone is saying, but once saw a guy with a foot that looked like death, probably untreated diabetic. He only went to the ER because his sons dragged him. He literally had his foot inside a plastic bag. Bag was tied around his ankle because of the smell. He insisted he was fine and to be let go. The amount of horribly sick patients that think they're just fine is too damn high.
That's rough. It's wild how some people ignore serious health issues. You'd think the pain or smell would be a wake-up call. It's a reminder that not everyone sees things the same way, even when it's clear to others. Sometimes people need a push, like his sons did, to realize the seriousness of their situation. It's frustrating seeing that kind of denial. Health really has to be a priority.
Dentist here. 27-year-old patient comes in with mother. Mother is on disability. Patient has large amounts of decay on every single tooth in his mouth. Kid absolutely will not even listen to having his teeth pulled and dentures placed. Public health office. So most are uninsured/low financial status. Really should have most, if not all of them pulled. Agreed to do a mock-up treatment plan, which came out to roughly $4,500. That's with the sliding fee discount of 50% for the lowest financial level. They agreed to pay. Mom plunks $800 cash down for root canal to start off. I asked what happened for his teeth to get that bad. Stupidest answer I've had yet. A dentist before told me to mix dollar store mouthwash with peroxide and rinse with it. It absolutely wrecked my teeth afterwards. Mother agrees and swears that same thing happened to her husband. Older brother is getting all of his pulled.
That's rough. Just imagine going to the dentist and hearing that kind of story. The mix-up with the mouthwash and peroxide really messed things up for him. You think you're doing the right thing, and it backfires like that. It's sad to see the whole family dealing with dental issues like this. Sometimes, the simplest advice can end up being the worst. It's a tough situation for them. Hope they find a better path moving forward.
My elderly friend is the queen of self-diagnosis. She tells the doctors her prognosis and rarely follows through with their treatment for her actual issues. My personal favorite is that she produces too much electricity. Because of this, she has issues with anything electrical, namely computers, cash registers, pin pads, and my personal favorite, gas pumps. She's afraid she will blow up the pump, so I fill her tank for her. In reality, she is confused by technology and never wears her glasses. She was recently put on vitamin D pills because she rarely goes outside. Her house is basically a black box inside. I'm afraid to find her wrapped in foil one day.
That's a wild situation. I get how some people come up with their own explanations for things. It's interesting how she thinks she has this superpower of producing electricity, yet it's just a case of not keeping up with tech. Filling her tank is kind of a nice gesture though. Hopefully, she starts going outside more with that vitamin D. The foil idea definitely makes you wonder what goes on in her head.
Posted earlier things my patients as a paramedic told me, but this one is mine, albeit in reverse. Finally went urgent care one night after several days of severe abdominal pain. Doctor insisted that it was appendicitis, despite my insistence that I do not, in fact, have an appendix. He was thoroughly confused when he couldn't find the appendix with the ultrasound. Cue looking for my gallbladder, thinking gallstones. Swing and a miss. I'm missing my appendix because they took it out along with my gallbladder at 5 years old due to gallstones.
It's wild when you think about it. You go in thinking you're just having some pain, and the doctor is there convinced you have something you don't even have. It must have been frustrating trying to explain that to him. And then to go through all those tests, only to find out there was nothing left to find. I guess sometimes even doctors make mistakes, but it's your body, so you know it best.
Not a doctor, but I was in the ER in college in New York City for some crazy stress. I think I was over-caffeinated and had not slept in 2 days from studying. But anyway, I ended up just being dehydrated and they gave me in 4 and let me hang out there for a while. In the background, I kept hearing this guy yelling, "I'm gonna faint. I'm gonna faint." And it seems pretty legit, so I was getting worried. Finally, he yells it out one more time, and a doctor walks by and says, "Mister, you're in a hospital bed, so if you faint, I think you'll be okay."
That sounds like a wild experience. Stress and lack of sleep can really mess with you. The guy yelling must have added to the chaos. I can imagine how you felt, hoping everything was fine. That doctor's response is pretty classic, though. It kind of puts things in perspective. At least you got hydrated and some rest after that. Not the ideal way to spend time in the ER, but you got through it.
I once had a girl who said she had syphilis because she got like this ulcers in her mouth, which were coming and going, and she said she had zits on the back of her tongue. I looked, and it was her taste buds, no other lesions to be seen. I told her that primary lesions in syphilis almost always cure completely, so if those ulcers were appearing and disappearing every once in a while, it was very unlikely. By that point, she had gotten a lot more relaxed, and the consult went great, and she went home feeling a lot better. Still, I made her get an STD panel because she was sexually active, young, and in doubt of her partner. Next consult, she shows up saying, "Doc, I think I do have syphilis." She did. I learned a valuable lesson that day. The cool thing was she wanted to do her treatment and follow up with me because she told me she had seen a lot of people before me, but no one bothered to check.
That's interesting. It's always surprising how easy it can be to misinterpret symptoms. It's good you helped her feel better and made sure she got tested. Sometimes it just takes that one person who actually listens. Seems like you made a real connection there, and it's cool that she wanted to continue with you for treatment. You never know the impact you can have on someone's health experience.
As a resident, I had one patient wait in the ER waiting room for 8 hours for painful lips. Diagnosis: chapped lips. Prescribed chapstick. Another patient waited the same amount of time in the ED waiting room at the County Hellhole Hospital. The reason? Mosquito bite. One stupid mosquito bite. He said he was a hemophiliac and was afraid he would bleed to death. Edited typo.
It's interesting how people prioritize things. I remember a friend who once waited hours in the ER for a splinter. He thought it was a big deal, but it was just a tiny piece of wood. It's funny what people worry about sometimes. The doctors just rolled their eyes, but at the end of the day, he felt relieved after it was taken out. Just goes to show everyone has their own version of a crisis.
Dentist here. I had a patient come into my office, absolutely certain he only had gingivitis and needed a normal cleaning. All because he had Googled his symptoms and believed he could get a normal clean and go back home and do oil pulling after, which would somehow miraculously heal his gums. Would not allow me to take x-rays or deep clean his teeth, which he needed because plaque was formed well below his gums. He even told me his gums were bleeding from just smiling, moving his mouth, etc. He insisted on just a regular clean and then accused me of trying to make money off him when I basically put my foot down and said I wouldn't be working on his mouth unless he allowed me to do my job properly. I was glad when he decided to walk out and never come back.
It's wild how some people think they know better than the professionals. I had a friend who thought he could fix his car just by watching videos online. He kept insisting he just needed to change the oil. But when it broke down completely, he finally called a mechanic. Sometimes it's best to let the experts do their thing instead of trying to DIY everything. People can be really stubborn.
I had a woman once that was convinced that someone was trying to steal her Klonopin, so she ate all 45 of them. We tried to get her to drink AC so that we hopefully don't have to lavage them out. She fought us over that because now we were the ones who were trying to steal them from her. That was on an ER rotation in paramedic school. Another was the woman who swore she was having a heart attack, despite not having any symptoms at all. We did the EKG and full workup, which unsurprisingly came out completely normal. She insisted, so we transported her anyways. Our apparently ran all their tests and discharged her when they were clear. 3 hours later, guess who calls? She's still convinced she's having an MI and wants to be transported to another hospital. She was politely told to fuck off. Found out later that she calls once a week or so. Unrelated, but funny was the old man who called us out because he couldn't find the TV remote and his son was asleep.
That story about the woman eating her Klonopin is wild. It must have been frustrating trying to help her while she thought you were after her pills. And the heart attack lady, I can imagine how tiring that must have been, especially dealing with someone constantly convinced they're having a medical emergency. The old guy looking for his remote adds a nice touch of humor. People really have some unexpected reasons for calling for help.
A previously healthy, young, working professional woman in her early 30s came to the ER, saying she had a cold that's just been lingering and she couldn't get over. Said she needed some antibiotics. She was actually admitted to the hospital and just kept getting worse and worse. Pneumonia to respiratory failure needing intubation/ventilator to ARDS to septic shock and multi-organ failure. Every possible test and study done. Running out of answers, someone decided to order an HIV test. Turns out she had full-blown AIDS and a CD4 count that was practically zero. Unfortunately, did not survive.
It's wild how quickly things can turn. This woman seemed healthy but ended up with a severe illness that spiraled out of control. It's a reminder that we can't always see what's going on beneath the surface. A simple cold turned into something deadly. The last thing anyone expects is for a routine visit to lead to such a tragic outcome. Life can be unpredictable like that.
Doctor here. One story that sticks out is a woman who was convinced that she had Helicobacter pylori, bacteria that causes stomach ulcers in some, and had to be tested. I reviewed her chart, and it showed multiple negative tests over the years, and even a biopsy sample from an upper GI scope that was negative. Her treatment for this infection was to eat dirt. Literally dirt from the internet advertised to cure stomach issues. There was no convincing her that this wasn't a thing. This is a tame one, but the others are too specific to tell without the possibility of revealing the patient's identity.
It's interesting how people can latch on to certain ideas. I had a friend who insisted they had a rare condition based on symptoms they found online. Despite multiple doctors saying otherwise, they kept trying home remedies. At one point, they thought eating only green foods would fix everything. It's wild how the internet can lead someone down that path, even when the facts don't line up. Sometimes, people just believe what they want to believe.
Slightly different. In my teens, me and some mates are walking along, totally stoned. This old lady in front of us trips up and smashes her face on the ground. Blood is pouring everywhere. Being the lovely boys we are, we lift her up, and thankfully we're informed that there is a GP practice only 100 meters away. After the incredibly slow walk arm in arm to this place, we walk in, and just as I'm about to shout, "We have an emergency!" The little old lady, whose clothes are now covered in blood, politely requests I've come to collect my prescription.
That's wild. It's funny how things can take a turn when you're not expecting it. Imagine being all freaked out, and then she just wants her prescription. It shows how normal life can keep going, even after something shocking. Kind of a reminder that people have their own stuff going on, no matter what's happening around them. Makes you think about priorities in strange situations.
Not a doctor, but I went to the ER post-DVT with symptoms of a pulmonary embolism. I had chest pains, could not catch my breath, and I passed out in the waiting room. Even though I had oxygen sats below 80% and was clearly struggling for air, the ER doctor actually patted my hand and told me I must be stressed and tried to discharge me. I told him I refused to leave, and he needed to check with my PCP before he did anything else. I ended up staying in the hospital for 4 days, and eventually they found a small clot in my lungs. I still couldn't walk very far without stopping by the time they discharged me.
That sounds intense. It's wild how sometimes you really have to advocate for yourself in medical settings. Going through so much, only to be told it's stress, must have been frustrating. It's good you stood your ground and insisted on more care. 4 days in the hospital is no joke. I'm glad they figured it out eventually. Recovery can be a process, especially with something like that.
I'm trying to see if my doctor is in here. Last week I was thoroughly convinced I had cancer in my neck and shoulder because I felt 2 hard masses. I just knew it had to be cancer. Doc looks at it and then slings me up and said the damage has been done. You just need to let it heal. And I was of course confused. I had apparently damaged my muscle, and it had formed 2 pinto beans-sized knots. He was right though. Knots are starting to go away. Dr. Rob, if you're in here, I admit it. You were right and I was wrong.
It's interesting how quickly we jump to conclusions about our health. I had a similar experience once, thinking I had something serious because of a little discomfort. Turns out it was just tension from stress. It's a relief to hear your knots are improving. Doctors can be surprisingly insightful, even when we don't want to hear their take. Sometimes, it's all about letting things heal.
Not my patient, but my dad's. In the early 70s, a guy walks in claiming that he has colon cancer and is really worried. He had a history of coming in repeatedly to the clinic for various ailments. Dad checked him out and saw no problems. Sent him back with a scheduled review. The patient still had the same worries and stuck with his claim that he had colon cancer. Dad told Hi, "If you want, I'll give you in writing that you don't have this. Can you imagine that today? Tongue sticking out. And if you do, I'll take care of you." The patient stopped coming to the clinic with the complaint, but he and Dad became really good friends. 40 years later, he is still a hypochondriac, and Dad still reassures him. Edit grammar.
It's interesting how sometimes people just need reassurance. My dad had this patient in the 70s who was convinced he had colon cancer. Even after checks showed nothing, the guy kept pushing it. Dad offered him a written note saying he was fine, which is pretty funny now. They ended up becoming good friends, and even 40 years later, the guy still worries about his health, but at least he has my dad to talk to.
My sister keeps diagnosing me with endometriosis and polycystic ovaries, and another one I can't remember. She gets furious with me for not going to the doctor because I don't care about my health, and I'm sticking my head in the sand, etc., etc. My only symptom is irregular periods and normal cramps/fatigue while on my period. But apparently cramps aren't normal, and neither is wanting to eat chocolate and take a nap. It's down to the point where I literally cannot say a single word about my health in any way, shape, or form without her jumping on my ass. And no, she's not a doctor. She does have endo and PCOS, which apparently qualifies her to diagnose me.
Sounds like your sister is really worried about you, but it's tough when that comes off as judgment instead of support. Health issues can be complicated, and everyone experiences things differently. It's okay to want to handle things at your own pace. Maybe a calm chat with her could help her understand where you're coming from. Just because she has those conditions doesn't mean everyone else does too.
My best friend had weird symptoms for a while and became obsessed with Googling and researching the possible causes. She was convinced that she had multiple sclerosis. She woke up one morning and the lower half of her right side was numb. She went to an emergency care and asked for an MRI. The doctor there believed she had sciatica pain and refused. Weeks went by, and she went to another urgent care and was finally referred for an MRI. Turns out she had very advanced MS, now is partially paralyzed.
That's a tough situation. It's crazy how our minds can race with worries, especially about health. Sometimes doctors can miss things, which makes it all the more frustrating. It's sad to hear that your friend is dealing with such a serious condition now. It must have been a long journey for her, and it really shows how important it is to listen to our bodies and advocate for ourselves.
Nobody really wants to be responsible for their obesity, so people Google diseases that could be causing them to gain weight. My favorite was a lady who insisted that she had Cushing's disease. What people mean when they say have a glandular issue. It's obvious that she wasn't. It's rare, and there are some classic signs that normal obese people don't have. So I went through an exercise where we discuss all the food that she ate during a typical day. We hit roughly 3,000 calories before finishing what she typically eats for lunch. The conversation never goes well from there. There is nothing that I can prescribe for denial.
It's interesting how some people look for explanations for their weight. I remember a friend who always thought it was something medical. We ended up talking about her daily meals, and the numbers were surprising. It was clear she was consuming a lot more than she realized. Even when it was laid out in front of her, she dismissed it. It's tough when someone is in denial about their habits.
Vet tech assistant. I work overnights, and usually I clean, just check vitals on patients and answer phones. I pick up a call at about 2:30 in the morning. This woman is convinced her dog has bloat. While that sounds benign, there's one kind of bloat where the stomach twists and cuts off circulation of blood from the stomach. It is deadly if not caught quickly. There's other kinds that are treatable, but when you look up dog bloat, you're going to find the killer one first. I ask her what makes her think her dog is bloat. She tells me her dog ate a piece of steak and started acting more sleepy and his stomach was a little bloated. She looked that up on Pet WebMD and it told her that her dog had bloat. I go through the symptoms of GDV, the killer bloat, and she says no to all of them except the bloated stomach. I give her the price to get an emergency exam. She suddenly stops freaking out, thinks it's not a big deal, and hangs up. She never came in for an exam.
I can relate to situations like that. Had a friend once who was in a panic about her cat after finding some weird stuff online. She thought it was critical, but after we talked it out, it turned out to be nothing. Sometimes, people jump to conclusions based on a quick search without all the facts. It's good to stay calm and get the right advice instead of freaking out over nothing.
I was the one that self-diagnosed. I've been unwell for years, and the GP kept telling me it was IBS, I'd be fine. Well, my mom was told to check out celiac disease for her issues, and it wasn't, but my symptoms fit. So off to the GP I go, I have these symptoms, they fit, and I'd like to have the blood test. They refused, said I was too fat for celiac, and it just IBS. I cried from frustration, and apparently that guilt them into saying, okay, have the test. I did, and yes, I have celiac disease, and yes, you can be fat and have it.
It's tough when you feel unheard by doctors. I had a similar experience where I kept pushing for answers. After a long time, I got some tests done that revealed something surprising. It's frustrating how weight can influence perceptions about health. Sometimes, you just have to advocate for yourself to find out the truth. Glad you eventually got the diagnosis. It's important to know what's really going on.
Physiotherapist here. I had someone come into the clinic and ask to buy exercise bands to do rehab for his shoulder, but didn't want to come in for an assessment first because he already knew what was wrong. When I asked him, he told me that he tore his labia. I didn't correct him. He meant labrum.
That's a pretty funny mix-up. It's interesting how people can be so sure of their diagnosis without seeing someone first. I guess he was confident but didn't realize it was a pretty big mistake. It's always good to get the right assessment, though, especially when it comes to rehab. Makes you wonder how many others have similar misconceptions. Just a reminder that communication is key in healthcare.
I'm a medical student, and this is from when I worked in an ER. It's not really a ridiculous self-diagnosis, but it was pretty funny. The doctor I worked with walked into the room after the nurse was finished, and this lady immediately told him she had a problem with her gallbladder. She started listing off all the symptoms she had, which read like a textbook's description of gallbladder pain. Finally, he asked her to point to where she felt the pain, and she confidently pointed to her left upper abdomen and said, right here. The gallbladder is on the right side. Her husband thought it was hilarious.
That's a classic. It's funny how people get so sure about their symptoms. She had the whole textbook memorized but still got the side wrong. Must have been a confusing moment for her when the doctor pointed it out. Her husband probably enjoyed the whole thing. I guess it just goes to show that medical knowledge doesn't always match up with reality. Smart but not quite right.
My sister is a nurse and has experienced Munchausen, SP, syndrome by proxy when she was working in the ER. This mom would bring her kid in every few days with a new ailment. It wasn't a case of new parent paranoia either. The mother would get angry and irate when the doctors told her that her baby was perfectly healthy. I think CPS eventually got involved.
That's a pretty intense scenario. It's unsettling how some people can go to such lengths for attention or sympathy. Your sister must have seen a lot in the ER, but dealing with that situation sounds really tough. It's good that CPS got involved. Gotta protect the kid from that kind of mess. Just another reminder of how complex human behavior can be.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.